Under pressure, just that subtle flick of the wrist.
The ability to be able to use the wrist for Federer to get the ball across.
Oh, that wrist is lively.
What's going on, guys? It's Coach Steven with 15 Points of Tennis. And when it comes to the stroke, the wrist is one of the most hotly discussed topics and one of the most difficult to master. And I certainly struggled with it, partly because I don't have very good hand-eye coordination, and partly because I think a lot of people who do it really well aren't 100% conscious of what's actually happening. See, I've been told all sorts of things, like if you just keep your wrist relaxed, the wrist lag just happens naturally. Or, once you rotate with the hips and unwind, the wrist drops in the slot and accelerates all by itself. And at least for me, my wrist wasn't doing anything well by itself, and that's when I had to step in and figure out what the heck is going on. So you might wonder, why does this topic get so much attention, the wrist in particular? And see, most of the magic in the stroke actually happens right here in the wrist. Tennis is as much of a fine motor skill sport, meaning the small muscles, as it is a gross motor skill sport, the big muscles. So if you can get the wrist right, if you get it right, you'll get a huge benefit in terms of both feel and power. And if you don't get it right, I can honestly say you'll never hit the ball that well, and I know because I've been there. All right, so we're going to crack into the video. Appreciate you subscribing. If you enjoy these more technical breakdowns, make sure you hit the bell so you get the next part as well. So let's get started. Now, to preface this video, understand that the wrist right here is simply a joint, right? And joints don't move by themselves. Your forearm muscle is what extends and contracts to give your wrist movement. And this is so important when we talk about any stroke, be it the serve, the ground stroke, or volley, because when you talk about the swing, all the speed is contained right here in the tip of the racket. Okay, in the tip of the racket. And let me show you what I mean in terms of the kinetic system that we use, the muscles and joints that we use to hit the ball. Okay, so when we swing, if I use my entire body like this, okay, my big muscles, now focus on how fast the racket tip is moving. If I use my big muscles like this, the racket tip isn't moving very fast. There's no speed in the body. Even the shoulder, if I move it back and forth, the racket isn't moving that fast. The tip isn't moving that fast. There's no speed in the shoulder. Okay, this is slow. But if I keep my body still, my arms still, and just engage this forearm muscle right here, look, I can get tremendous racket head speed with literally just a small muscle. And this is where a tremendous amount of the power comes from, right in that tip. And so you can imagine tennis players have pretty muscular forearms because of this. And I know you've seen the pros do it, but just to prove a point, because we are far from pro players. But on this passing shot, he's just going to flick his wrist in isolation and get a pretty good amount of power. Now this next shot you see, I do not condone this as a tennis coach, but you're going to see him hit straight up and call it a slap if you will, but there's going to be a lot of forearm and very little knee bend here. Alright, now I'm going to show you a quick demo how this works in actuality. If I move my shoulder like this, again, it's the slow tip, right? There's not much power in that, even if I'm using a lot of muscle, moving my big muscle. But literally just moving my wrist, I can get a ton of power, but from this really small muscle by moving the tip of the racket. All right, same thing with the serve, moving my big muscles here versus really getting this snap. Same thing with the ground strokes, getting this snap right here at contact. And that's why you see the pros like Federer with such a short backswing, literally with a very short backswing, the pros can get tremendous amounts of power. Right? They don't take the racket all the way back here. And that's because they're using the wrist properly. I mean, if you look at some of these kids, 80 to 100 pounds, absolutely crushing the ball, they're not big and strong physically, okay? But they have a very strong wrist, they have a very strong grip and forearm, and they can create that racket's head speed to give power. So some of these kids, they can create power, but the downside is because they're small and they don't have a lot of body mass, they don't do a great job of taking power. So again, some of these small kids, while they can create power and generate it, if you crush the ball at them, you can easily overpower them. Now here's the demo, and I'm going to start with just a shoulder-based swing. Now watch the racket tip on these first few. This is about the hardest I can hit these volleys, and they're not bad, but compare them to these next 4 or 5, where I'm really moving the tip. And you see in the lower right-hand corner, I'm keeping the hand more still and using the wrist a ton more, and this is way more pop on the volley. So that's how you get pop on the volley. And while I am no Pete Sampras myself, I've seen very few beginner to intermediate level players actually be able to punch the ball through the court and generate pace and have to resort to angle volleys and drop volleys to hit winners. Now this concept is often missed, okay, because when you see the pros volley in actuality, or hit any ground stroke for that matter, you see the whole arm moving. And yes, they move the whole arm, but what's often missed is the nuance, okay? As I'm swinging my shoulder, like, your eye is drawn to the big movements, which is the shoulder. But what's really going on right here, with the snap of the wrist, see right here, there's so much nuance that happens in the wrist that's missed with the human eye. All right, so you try to volley like the pros, it doesn't quite look the same. Now, I knew a coach who, from a developmental perspective, would start kids learning how to do what I call isolated wrist swing. So you get your wrist dropped, the wrist cocked back and loaded, you're keeping everything still, your body, your arm, and literally just firing the wrist and finishing. Firing the wrist and finishing. Okay, and what it helped the kids do is kind of rewire your brain to think a little differently, because power and creating power is counterintuitive. Your body thinks, okay, I want to hit harder, use more big muscles, but no, it's really the small muscles that create that speed in the tip. So as you're developing your stroke, my suggestion is make sure you get the wrist right here perfect, and then the wrist and the bicep, the small muscles, get this really perfect before you start to add more of the bigger movements. But these bigger movements are happening before contact, and you don't lose the integrity of the wrist and the bicep firing right here, and the feel of this. So here is the wrist isolated swing, and you can already see there's pretty good pop on this ball already, and this is what I want you to get first before you add the full swing, and you still have that same movement at contact. It's just less visible. Not happy with the balance after these shots, but that's not the point of this demo. Alright, so if you guys want to learn how to put away short balls, slices that float up in your strike zone, we have to generate pace, sitters, okay, and really generate your own pace. A lot of coaches will tell you, oh, more knee bend, load up with the knees, get deeper, right? And yes, you will get a little bit more power, okay, from more and deeper knee bend, but very little power compared to the amount of energy you're expending, all right? When I put away short balls, again, I'm focused on actually creating speed in the racket tip here, speed in the racket tip and getting this perfect so I can actually get enough speed to put the ball through the court. A lot of times I don't even bend my knees as much. I'm just right here, right here, and trying to get the speed through the court. It's when I'm defending and someone's ripping the ball low and hard where I need more of my big muscles, right? And I'm deflecting, okay? So when you work on that put away ball, again, you have to prioritize. I'm not saying don't load up with the legs, but prioritize what is the most important element of that put away ball. Now I know this might be overkill, but just to show you again, the big muscles are good for taking pace and for stability. Not so good for putting the ball away and creating power. I mean, I guess you can play kind of okay like this, but tennis won't really be that fun. And look at this deep knee bend. I'm trying to bend my knees all the way down, not much on the ball. And you might be asking yourself, well, doesn't Novak Djokovic get a really deep knee bend, like getting Djokovic low? But Djokovic also uses his wrist properly, while I'm just kind of locking my wrist and hitting with my body. Look at the racket speed now, where I'm getting less knee bend, but a lot more out of my forearm, maybe a little bit more out of my biceps too. But this is what you should be focused on when you hit put away balls. that one's too far in front, so that was just bad timing. But for the most part, now I can hit the ball hard enough where it can actually get through the cork. So you have to be very clear with what you're trying to do with each type of shot and be able to adjust accordingly. Now, I do not endorse my continental / Eastern grip one-handed forehand, but just to show you, with the one-handed stroke you can get much more tip movement compared to a two-handed stroke. So if you have a two-handed backhand, this applies the same as well, but it won't be as pronounced.
Oh, I mean, blink and you would have missed it.
So now that we've got you moving the tip of the racket, instead of trying to do a body swing to create speed with the racket, I want to talk about racket path, because this all relates, and I'm going to bring it full circle, no pun intended, all right? But when we talk about racket path, we want ideally for it to be circular instead of linear. And the reason why is we never want the momentum of the racket to break. And if you think about the infinity sign, which is never ending, the infinity sign is two circles that never end, right? And the same thing with the stroke, you should be able to go forehand, backhand, where I can keep this continuous, where the tip never stops moving and I'm feeling the tip. So what happens is, as we're accelerating around the loop, right, and we're building up momentum, all the energy in the racket is pushed to the outside of the racket, right, and the outside of the racket is right here in the tip. It's pushed to the outside. So as you swing, you need to feel the weight in the tip of the racket. And if you ever lose a feeling of the tip as you swing, you're going to essentially start to muscle the ball, right, rather than let the tip come through and accelerate, right, being in sync. Now, I know I've done this demo before, but as you swing the racket back and forth like a pendulum, okay, swing it back and forth, feel the rise and fall of the racket. Down, up, down, up. Now keep your hand still so you can feel the tip. Now I can feel the tip rotating around my hand. Okay, and you want to feel the tip at all times. This is where most of the energy is, and I'm keeping the energy on the outside of the racket. So if I were to just drop the ball in the racket path, that's quite a bit of power for very little energy. If I were to muscle the ball, again, I wouldn't be able to get much power. And guys, so much of technique comes down to how much power you can get for the least amount of energy. And that's essentially what we're doing by keeping the power and feeling the weight in the tip at all times. So just about any stroke, when you hit your ground strokes, you should be able to see this loop right here that we talked about, this movement, you should be able to feel that in your hand and go right into the swing. Same thing on both ground strokes. Ground strokes, you can muscle the ball more. It's even more imperative on your serve. So like I'm going to make this loop behind my head. See this loop? Dropping the wrist. And then you go right into your serve. If you lose a feeling of the tip on your serve, man, if you've seen me serve sometimes, that's my issue. I need to keep working on that. Otherwise, your serve is going to look very stiff, and it's going to look like you're muscling the ball. So these figure eights are excellent, and they're something I'm doing to help me with my feel with the wrists and keeping the momentum continuous. And you should be able to do one figure eight and serve, one figure eight and serve. And I do this with the students quite frequently, those who have trouble feeling the tip throughout the entire stroke. Circular is one thing, but even like my backhand is a little bit more linear. But you see how I make this little circle back here? It's still kind of an oval, so it still, again, keeps the momentum from breaking. And if you have a linear swing like this, try to do your best to feel it in the tip. So, you know, there are a number of cases, and if you have a lot of extreme wrist lag, like Roger and Rafa, the issue I've seen, at least with a lot of junior players and just regular, you know, club players trying the more of the wrist lag, is not because they can't get racket head speed, but they lose a feel in the tip. They just start to muscle the tip through, even though they're accelerating it faster and faster. So you have to really, it's so short, right? But right there, you see right there, feel the racket and feel the weight before you accelerate, okay? So think of yourself like a ribbon dancer, like twirling the ribbon. once you lose that weight in the tip, you're pretty much toast, you're dead meat. All right, now, I have this theory that especially the younger kids who have a strength deficiency learn how to use their wrists a lot more effectively out of necessity. When I started tennis, I was a little bit older and I had a martial arts background, so I did a lot of strengthening. And this is similar to many adult players that I see, playing. For me, my gross motor skills took over and I learned to muscle the ball to compensate. So once you're hyper aware of the tip at all times, again, the magic of the stroke right here, and once you're aware of it, I think you can really make some solid progress. So appreciate you guys watching this video. This video we talked more broad concepts about how the wrist affects the stroke. In the next video, we're going to dive really deep into the nitty-gritty, talk about the wrist lag and some of the specifics that go into making up using the wrist effectively. So thanks so much, and we'll see you on the next video.